Hello, everyone. Today, I would like to talk about archival data that we have been processing for the Mansi language varieties and about the workflow of this work and also the involvement of members of the Mansi community into the project. So firstly, I would like to give you some brief information about the Mansi languages. They belong to the Finno-Ugric subgroup of the Uralic language family, and Mansi is considered to be a very close and possibly closest linguistic relative of Hungarian, which is quite interesting. However, Mansi is today considered to be a subgroup of languages which used to comprise up to 4 different varieties: Northern, Eastern, Western, and Southern Mansi. But today, unfortunately, the only living variety is Northern Mansi, which has around 1,000 speakers at the most optimistic estimate in 2 regions of Western Siberia in Russia: Khanty-Mansi Autonomous Okrug and Sverdlovsk Oblast. And I have worked with Mansi speakers in both of these regions. However, the Upper Lozva dialect, which is the smaller dialect, which has up to 100 speakers, but possibly even less, maybe around 70. It has young speakers, including children, which is very rare for endangered languages of Russia, especially for languages with only 1,000 speakers. And this enables a larger extent of cooperation with the community and different revitalization efforts as well. So here is a brief map to just point you in the direction where Mansi is located. On the left, we see a more detailed map of the 2 areas where the Northern Mansi language is spoken today. At the top, we see Khanty-Mansi Autonomous Okrug, and at the bottom, we see the north edge of the Sverdlovsk Oblast, which is a very tiny area where Mansi people used to settle for many years and still live now. And on this map, the density of the coloring shows the percentage of the ethnic population that speaks the language. And here we can see that in Sverdlovsk Oblast, in most areas, 100% of the ethnic population speak the language. And in Khanty-Mansi Autonomous Okrug, we see that the area is significantly larger and there are more villages where Mansi is spoken, and the total population of speakers is substantially more, but it is just a small percentage of the whole ethnic population of the area, because for decades people there have lived in mixed settlements with Russians, Komi, Khanty, and other nationalities, while in the Sverdlovsk Oblast is just mononational villages. And since 2017, I have been working on documentation of the Northern Mansi language, and we had several research grants in Russia, and our work has gone into various directions. It started out as documentation and mainly as gathering audio recordings for a future corpus, and it involved a lot of field work for the past 7 years, which we still try to continue. Also, there was some research on individual topics in phonology, grammar, and information structure. For example, I'm right now working on a PhD thesis on information structure in Northern Mansi. Also, we've undertaken revitalization attempts, including close cooperation with young speakers, but today I want to focus on the processing of Valery Chernetsov's archive, which was recorded in the 1920s and 1930s. So here I would like to move on to the description of the archive itself. And Valery Chernetsov was an ethnographer and archaeologist who encountered Mansi early in his life, and he studied the Mansi language for a long time. He was proficient in the language, and he published extensive materials in Northern Mansi. For example, textbooks, dictionaries, text collections, etc. And in 1925-27 and 1931-38, he performed extensive field trips to all Mansi varieties present at the time, which would be Northern Mansi and also Eastern Mansi, which is unfortunately now extinct. And the archive itself is quite large, and it contains both his journals, photos, some of movie films, And also the linguistic part of the archive contains 16 notebooks up to 150 pages each with texts in different Mansi dialects. And in total it comprises around 1,000 pages, so it's a quite substantial amount of recordings, which is extremely valuable. And we tried to undertake the task of processing this archive with our grant. Here you can see the name of the grant. And the grant lasted for 3 years, but unfortunately the materials are quite difficult and the volume is huge. So we did not manage to completely process the archive in 3 years. And I'm trying to slowly continue this work in my free time until today. So here's the example of how the texts from the Valery Chernetsov archive look like, and here are also some photos of Valery Chernetsov himself. And so these are just notebooks with recordings made in pencil by hand. And the characteristic feature is that all of the texts are recorded just in Mansi without any translations. And there are very, very few comments on the blank pages, either in Mansi, like down here, which is just a different version of the word that is used in the text, possibly a comment from the native speaker, or sometimes translations into Russian. But here I would like to point out that even though for me, for example, Russian is a native language and Mansi is not, for me, it was much harder to understand his Russian handwriting than his handwriting while he was writing in Mansi. So the comments do not always help. And they're very, very few. So basically, you're just working with pure raw Mansi texts with all the corrections, repetitions, and natural speech. So most of the texts here are folklore narratives. Some of them are quite long and complicated, which is also very culturally important. Sometimes songs and riddles are present as well, and the texts are recorded in the Finno-Ugric transcriptions with minor modifications, which are introduced for better representation of Mansi dialects. And within his notebooks, you can see that he writes different Mansi varieties, dialects, subdialects, with different symbols sometimes to better represent the phonetic. And so the processing was split into 3 simple steps. The first step was digitization, and our work was not very technologically advanced. And so in our case, people who worked on digitization were just retyping the text into the doc files. But the important part here was to completely retain the original transcriptions, including all corrections, crossed out parts, markings, everything, because on later stages, if you don't need this, you can always remove it, but we aim at preserving all of the information completely because you never know what's important until you dive deeper. Then, of course, translations of these texts into Russian, which was carried out with Mansi native speakers, and glossing. And most of the notebooks went through all 3 stages, but the glossing and in many cases translations are preliminary. And regarding translations, it doesn't mean that the translation is of bad quality. It's just not a very literal, well-written translation. So it retains the meaning, but sometimes it's more like, well, not word-by-word translation, but more close to the original Mansi text than standard literal Russian. And glossing is preliminary in many cases. But as I discovered recently, we did lose track of some of the notebooks back in 2020, and 3 notebooks lack translation and glossing so far. So they're the first priority for further processing. So here are just brief illustrations of the processing. So here is the first step of digitization. We take the text, and for example, this page of text, and transfer it into Word files. And these lines here show the ends of the lines in the original text, just to keep track of that as well. And as you see, we retain everything, all the diacritics, all the punctuation marks, all the crossed out parts, everything. Then you take the digitized text and you add translation. Again, not very technologically advanced. We aim to improve on that, but at the time we didn't have any technical specialists in our project, so we had to do what we know to do. So unfortunately here the translation is in Russian because this is the state of processing at this point. And then glossing, and the glossing was mostly carried out in Excel tables, not in Word files. So here I would like to briefly tell you about the project team as well. So we have 2 non-Mansi students who perform digitization of the texts, then me and also 3 other non-Mansi linguists who were trained in glossing in Mansi, and we performed glossing of the texts, and also me and 4 Mansi speakers who performed translation of the texts with various degree of involvement. And some texts we also translated on field trips with other speakers. And I also have a good command of Mansi. I can speak it, I can understand it, so I could make some translations on my own. But I always made sure to further proofread them with speakers and get their comments as well. So here are the speakers who were involved in the project. And I will tell you a little bit more about them. So the majority of translation work was done by me and Vera Anyamova, and with occasional help from her mother Albina Anyamova. And for Vera, the translation of archival text became a full-time job for almost 2 years, which was amazing for her situation because she was mostly staying at home due to some health issues, and she managed to earn a salary with this project, which she couldn't otherwise get from a regular job in her little town. So it was a very good situation for her. And we provided her with a computer and taught her to use all the necessary programs. And we had Zoom calls twice a week. And on these Zoom sessions, we translated together. And I also got important cultural commentaries from Vera because there are a lot of obscure folklore and traditional details, which are not understandable for you as an outsider. So it was amazing. And her mother Albina also consulted us about archaic vocabulary or some cultural aspects. Then Tatiana Bakhtiyarova has a philological education, and she worked at the Ob-Ugric Institute of Applied Development and Research. And translating archival text was not a difficult task for her, which is amazing. And she preferred to work alone, so we provided her with material. And when she had free time, she translated it on her own and received payment for the corresponding amount of work. And another valuable member of the team is Evgeny Anyamov, who is a Mansi rap artist and who has a great command of the language, even though he's around 28 years old, maybe. Yeah, I think so, including rarer vocabulary, and he often consults older speakers on some words he would like to use in his lyrics. And one of the project members, Valery Chernetsov, occasionally worked with him together, where they translated texts together like I did with Vera. And also on field trips, we tried to use the extra opportunities to talk about some difficult parts of the texts with other speakers. Here, for example, with Valery Anyamov and his mother, Alexandra Anyamova. And so briefly about our future plans. So, of course, the main priority is to finish the translation and the glossing of the remaining notebooks, then proofread all the translations with native speakers again, and make a more standardized Russian translation, and carefully check the glossing as well, which will take a lot of time. And we would like to start creating the English versions of the translations and glossing, but the main problem is that we have no funding, so I cannot create a team for this work, and I mostly have to work alone at the moment and consult speakers if they're willing to spare some time for me. So it's not ideal. Then, of course, we would like to spread the materials because right now they're not really accessible. We used to have a website at the Tomsk University where our grant was based, but after the end of the grant, the person who was responsible for the website left the university and we can't get in touch with anyone, and it's an unfortunate situation. And so we would like to create a proper website for all the available materials, publish some of the texts as a book in Khanty-Mansiysk because it's a popular format here. and also include Chernetsov's texts into the National Mansi corpus, which is being developed in Khanty-Mansiysk by the Mansi community, together with local IT specialists, and I'm involved as a consultant there as well. And we, of course, have further plans regarding further archives, but starting a new project on a new archive would, of course, involve receiving a new grant or something like that. But this year, we discovered the location and examined the contents of Yevdokiya Rambandiyeva's archive in Khanty-Mansiysk, and it contains a lot of unpublished archival text from 1950s, 1960s, from her field trips. And these texts look very similar to Chernetsov's just notebook in pencil, only Mansi without translation, so very familiar format, and it would be really exciting to work on this as well, but we will see what the future will show. So thank you for your attention. This was my brief presentation of our archival work, and I will be excited to answer any questions you might have. Thank you.